Hi everyone. Welcome to APICS Learning Systems 2020 update. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for question-answer session. If you look at the toolbar on the right of your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question, simply type it in the designated box and select Send Question to Staff, and then select Send. You can do this at any time during the presentation. We will answer as many questions as we can today. Submitted questions will be consolidated, answered, and posted on apics.org in a Q&A document. Those of you viewing this program in a room with several participants may want to designate one person to type in the questions for your group. In addition, this online event is being recorded. We will post the webinar audio, PowerPoint slides, along with the Q&A document on apics.org within 2 weeks of today's live webinar, and we will email the link to everyone who is registered for this webinar. But feel free to share this link with other instructors and your APICS partner colleagues. Should you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar Tech Support at 800-263-6317 for the U.S. and internationally you can call +001-805-617-7000. So welcome again, everyone. We're about to start the APICS webinar, APICS Learning Systems 2020 update, the fourth in our 2019 APICS Instructor Development Series. We're very excited to share with you some of the improvements and changes that we've made to all the learning systems for 2020. I'm very happy to introduce our presenter on today's webinar, Megan Glass, who's the Product Manager for the APICS Learning Systems at Homes. Also joining us is Michelle Morrison, the Director of Global Partners for the APICS Learning Systems, who will be assisting with the question and answer portion of the webinar. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Bob. We're happy to be here today. So I guess to kick it off, what we're going to be doing today is going through a lot of the high-level changes that are going to be in the change documents that are available to you in PRC and your instructor kits, and that have also been or will be sent out to you via email as well, that kind of highlights everything that's going on. So to start off, we're really going to go through a lot of key changes that apply to all of the products, so it doesn't matter which certification program it is. And here's sort of the short list of what those are, and we're going to go through each of these individually. But some of our key changes this year for 2020 include the addition of downloadable EPUBs. Those are going to replace the Vitrium PDFs. We've moved progress check questions into the online quizzes. The Liesl Smith exam prep video that's been at the end of the course for the last 2 years has been updated and segmented into a small series that's threaded throughout the materials. We've also done a repositioning of the additional resource links, so they're more front and center in the main online menu for students. We've also taken the opportunity to weave in those exam resources and links into the menu as well. And for the instructor-led version of the products, we've also included instructor slides embedded in the online menu for download, and we added a pop-up calculator. So for the downloadable EPUBs, what that looks like is essentially there's a link in a few different places in the materials. If they go to the Resource Center, there's a link there. Every single study page where they could go to read the embedded reader, there's also a link for them to go download if they would like to. And this is just a quick screenshot of what that page looks like. And obviously the downloads are a little different depending on which product it is, but essentially the process is the same. They go to this page and have to accept another license agreement. It really is something that they are covered under by their main license agreement, but we have them actively accept that portion again to say that they can't send that to anyone else, that it's only for their personal use. There's some instructions for downloading for Apple products as well as using via Android, Google Play Books, and then they can download those modules. So what this really allows students to do is to use all of the tools that are built into their own native e-readers. So if they have highlighting, if they have note sharing, if they have other materials that they highlight and note share using like Evernote and things like that, because they're using their own tools, they're able to then link those together, which is different from the Vitrium PDF with the code and the highlighting only in the PDF. And the other benefit to this is that you don't need to have any online access to do this reading. It's totally offline once you've downloaded it, including for iPads. So we're really excited about that addition. For progress check migration, we did move the progress check questions from the reading material, end of chapter, end of section areas into the online tools, and there's a few different reasons for this move. First of all, it really does allow for better tracking on student performance, both for question update and replacement, as well as from a student and instructor assessment perspective. So a student having that self-assessment in their reports along with all the other items gives them a much better view into how they're actually doing in each section. And some students were confused about not only why the items were separate from the online questions, but also some people thinking that those were the only questions that they had and that there weren't any additional questions. So this really allows us to say the reading materials are the reading materials and the questions are the questions, and they're all in one location. And when it comes to particular items in the classroom, I do know that there are a lot of instructors who might pull a particular item up to talk about in class. And, you know, Bob and I have talked about this for months as we've been going through this process, and I think he mentioned this at one of our last instructor events in Minneapolis, but if you do want to pull up an item, you can definitely pull up an item to talk about it in class. You just obviously can't be sharing that digitally, you know, sending that out, emailing that out, that kind of thing. So it still allows you to do that and to dissect individual items. It's just that they won't be at the end of the book anymore. For the Liesel-Smith exam prep video series, this is another one that we're really excited about. So previously, Liesel had about a 1 hour and 10-minute video that covered a lot of different topics, and it was located at the end of the course. And what Liesel has so graciously done this year for us is we split that up into a techniques series. So there's an introduction video at the beginning where Liesel talks through kind of who she is and what the goal of the series is. There's a video on study strategies, so really setting yourself up for success from the very beginning, and that's located on the Assess page. Then there's a video about how to approach exam questions, and obviously that's applicable throughout, from the pre-test through the study, all the way to when they're finally doing practice exams. So we have that video available to them if they do want to refresh themselves at any time on what her tips and techniques were for that. And then there's also a video about exam preparation timeline and exam day tips. So it does talk about an overall timeline approach, which is why we link it in the Assess page, but then a big portion of that too is what to do kind of leading up to exam day and what to do on exam day. So that'll also be on the practice page. And then the final two in the series are when, you know, how to know that you're ready to sit. And this is a much more kind of a soft touch kind of video. It's really talking about more of the psychological aspects as well as, you know, their readiness in terms of content. And then another video on the scaled scoring. So how they're measured on the exam. She goes through a pass and a fail view of what that looks like and what it means when you maybe, it looks like you're missing by 1 point, but it's actually a little more nuanced than that. And so we're really excited about this series and the ability to kind of thread that through the materials. Speaking of threading things through the materials, this is a sample page from the CLTD update. So one of the other areas that we kind of moved into more of the menu is the additional resources. So especially with CLTD, with it being a major update, we were able to pull in a lot of new materials here, a lot of videos, a lot of really interesting articles. And one of the reasons that we did this is, first, we don't want to bury this stuff in the resource center that sometimes students may or may not choose to go to. But also it really helps to bring in some of those hot topic areas that aren't technically in the base body of knowledge. Things like blockchain, for example, you know, that's not something that they're going to be tested on the exam, but it's something that's interesting. It's something that does still relate to other areas. So logistics network design, for example, we've got links in here about, you know, delivering blood by drone. It's very interesting. It's part of your design. It's not a best practice yet, right? So that's not ever going to be in the core reading materials until we're at that stage, but This allows us to really bring those in a little bit more threaded throughout the materials. And then the targeted exam resources. So similarly to what we're doing with the videos and the additional resources are the exam resources. So for CSCP and CLTD at the very beginning in the assess page, we have a link right away to encourage them to submit their eligibility application. They can do that, at any time, at least 2 weeks before, obviously, but really getting them thinking about that from the get-go. And then again, on the practice section, we're telling them, hey, it's time to sit for the exam and here are your steps. We have a link to the eligibility application again if they haven't already done that, a link to the exam handbook, and then a spot to send them to go and schedule their exam. And this tool is just for the instructor-led version of the program, so the self-study version does not include this, but we did also add embedded instructor slides. So what that means is when a student clicks on that slide link, they're going to see what you see here. It's embedded in the actual menu, but if they want to, they could also download or print these slides. It's different from the slide book. It doesn't have lines underneath it. It's one slide per page, but it does allow for people to take notes digitally if they want to do it in the PDF, or if they prefer to print it off and take notes and draw on a larger copy of the image, or just look at it for review when they're on the bus, something like that. It gives them that digital access to the slides as well as the slide book. And then the online calculator, this is kind of just a simple one, but it's a nice little pop-up that's available to them to use at any time in the material, similar to the glossary pop-up. Also, all of our products this year have had an update with the dictionary. So as you all know, that includes updated flashcards, updated references throughout the reading materials, updated references throughout all the online questions. Any term additions or changes were included to that. And so that was a big effort that we underwent this year to align ourselves with the new dictionary. We've also added a video this year that talks through Kanban, and it'll talk through both the one card and the two card systems. And we did use the visuals that were first created for the CPIM materials as a starting point for this, but it is applicable to all of the materials. And so the walkthrough of how that works will be available to everyone. And finally, for the all product section, we did also add this year in your instructor kit materials on PRC, there is a little scavenger hunt. It's just a quick 10-question kind of hunt through the materials. It's applicable to all of the programs. We encourage both you as well as your students to use this tool to, remind yourselves about what some of the key tools are and why they're important to use and things like that. And it works as a really great kind of starting point for students too on that first day of class. Instead of having everyone go around the room and talk about their names, you can have them sit here and do a scavenger hunt together and talk to each other. So we're hoping that that'll be a good tool for you all to use as well. Okay, so for CSCP only, we have another update. So the pretest has an increased length. It's a full-length 150-question assessment now. It really allows it to be much more comprehensive and more targeted learning feeding into those section quizzes. So for those of you who teach CSCP, I know you're aware that in the last updates we've added these section quizzes for the students to target their learning before they go into each of those chapters. And by providing more questions for each of these modules in the pretest, it means that they're getting better results in terms of their percentages. So the level of assessment is much more nuanced than with just 50 questions. So as part of that, we also took high-performing items from existing chapter quizzes, moved those into the pretest, and then supplemented with brand new items that were added to the chapter quizzes. So what that allows us to do too is to bring in new, fresh items and make sure that the items that are being used in the pretest are really well-used, proven assessment items as well. And then for CPIM only, one of the things that we did this year was the incorporation of the optional activities in different modalities. So instead of having them as optional activities separate with different worksheets, we had the team look at all of the items. Our instructional designer made suggestions on where things could be moved or if they needed to be removed. And those were evaluated. And so what happened with those is some of the items were moved online, and that means that they were kind of simple items that were just moved into an online quiz. For some of them that were more of a walkthrough, those were moved into the core slide decks. So the same main slide decks that you're used to. And then some of them were deemed for removal. So that may be because the content was already covered in an extensive way in either the reading materials, the instructor materials, and the online quizzes, and didn't see a need for additional content in that area, or for other reasons. So there is a list in the net change doc of where some of those items have moved, but essentially that was the process that we went through for CPIM. And then the biggest change this year is obviously the CLTD major revision. And so this year we've got a brand new product for what will be a brand new exam coming in March. So what that means is that there's a brand new exam content outline that had updated references, updated key terms. One of the changes was moving from 8 to 9 modules. From our perspective on the learning system side, we also moved from 4 to 2 printed books. We added 9 new case studies. We made sure the practice exam was extended so it's full length, and then the menu was obviously updated, and the structure now more closely resembles that of CSCP. So for the new outline and references, some of the references in the exam content manual were removed. A number of different editions were updated. The domains were changed, as I mentioned before, from 8 to 9, and then the weights also were adjusted slightly to match that. And there was an updated key terms list. The key terms list was reduced quite a bit, but those key terms are still present in the main content. And then some of, obviously, the subtopic areas within those domains, they had small changes. So we won't go through the individual changes from one ECM to the next, but I do want to just say that there is great update that happened with this, but it's not so significant that you can't have someone who's going through with the current materials still sit for either of the exams. So this list on the right-hand side is the order that our content goes in the learning system. It is a slightly different order from the ECM, but we do provide a mapping document, as we have in the past, to show you where those each map. And then that big change in terms of splitting the modules from 8 to 9, what happened there is essentially the inventory and warehousing, which was one module before, has now been split into one for inventory and one for warehousing. Moving from 4 to 2 printed books, so this will be the breakdown you'll see in the 2020 materials. We've got modules 1 through 4 in book 1, and then modules 5 through 9 in book 2. In addition, we added 9 new case studies, so that's 1 new case study per module. And what that's following is very similar to what we did with CSCP, where we have one scenario that's threaded throughout all of the different case studies. So in this particular case, we have a fictitious pharmacy holding company with a few subsidiaries, and we go through a lot of different topic areas, including pharmaceutical concepts, cold chain, LSP, blockchain, and different challenges that come up there. This list here is a list of the titles for each of those. So these are kind of the main topic areas that are covered for each of those case studies. But we're really excited about them and hope that you'll find them really useful in your classes for the 2020 materials. So for the menu structure, alluded to this earlier, but the study pages, if you remember, for 2019 and prior, the modules were kind of each in individual blocks on one study page, and moving forward, each module will have its own page. And part of the reason for that is obviously some of those additional resources that we're adding in to the materials. It makes more sense for each of these areas to kind of have their own little home. And then when students are moving on from one module to another, they're actually moving on from one page to another as well. Okay, so just to talk a little bit more about, what this update really means for students. Obviously, the exam is going to be changing on March 13th, and that does mean that they're going to go from version 1 to version 2, and there is not any window overlap happening there. So if they're not able to sit by the March 13th class and they've been preparing with the, ECM version 1 matched materials, they can still sit for the CLCD 2.0 exam. They just need to get a valid ATT, they can call the exam team to get that. And once they have that ATT, we are providing free digital-only upgrades for all students who are unable to sit. So this is happening. We're hoping that they're going to sit by the 13th or before the 13th. So this is kind of happening after the fact if they haven't been able to do that. But we will grant them access just like we do with any other student who hasn't been able to sit yet, give them access for one day after that ATT. They're also going to get an extension of their current product. I mean, they've been spending a lot of time preparing in the materials that they already have, and they're not going to be losing any access to that. We're just providing them additional access to the 2020 materials if they want it. So this is an offer we'll be kind of promoting and offering through most of next year, through mid-November of 2020 when we do the 2021 launch. So hopefully by that time, anyone who's already preparing for CLTD will have already gone through the system by that time. And then bundle purchasers, just a note about them, they will still be able to use their voucher for whichever exam credit they need. So the voucher is still good for 6 months. So if they're buying that, they bought that, let's say last week, and they want to sit for the new exam, for the old exam, they can use it. If they aren't going to be ready yet and they're going to be sitting March 14th, they can use that same voucher for that ATT as well. All right, so key dates here, obviously, we were launching last night, and into this morning, we've got some orders coming through, and Michelle can talk a little bit more about that, but obviously, the new exam is coming March 14th, that's when it'll begin, and there's not going to be any overlap there. I don't know if you want to talk any more about the orders, Michelle.
Yeah, so hi everybody, this is Michelle. So last night we were doing a lot of testing. The store's live. If you do happen to be the person from your organization that places orders, if you do log into the online store, you will see 2020 products. I will say, though, if there's anybody on the call that's thinking, oh, I might need one more 2019 by chance, we still have some stock of some of the materials. So the best thing to do with that is just to send us an email to the learning system support at homescorp.com and just let us know what you're needing, and we'll work with you separately on that. And then later today, or actually shortly after this call, we'll be sending out the official launch email. So just watch for that. That comes from the learning system support at homescorp.com email. And we'll have some more information on there. Similar to what many of you have already seen, it's just letting you know that we are officially live, and you can go ahead and start making your purchases. The one other thing I'd like to add for instructors is when those instructor kit orders are placed, what will happen is Lauren on the team will be contacting whoever places that order to offer up assistance in getting that instructor kit license assigned. It's possible that you can assign it yourself, but we want to help you there because it's important to get that instructor kit license assigned prior to any course sessions being set up in PRC. If you don't have that instructor kit license assigned to you, well, there's two things. You can't access the instructor materials, but also if you're added to a course session prior to having your instructor kit license assigned, it will assign a student license if in fact there is some in your inventory. And that's not the end of the world. We obviously can fix that. We're happy to work with partners where that happens because it does happen. So I'm just putting that out there up front. And it is mentioned in the email, so it's just being cognizant of the fact that, do I have my license assigned to myself yet? And if not, let's work with you to get that handled. But like I said, that email is coming out shortly after this call, and any questions you have at all about this, just reply back to that email, and Lauren and myself will be monitoring that inbox all day long, all night, and we're happy to help.
Thanks, Michelle. And before we head into the Q&A session, which is next, and I'll hand that off to Bob, I did want to go through just a small number of FAQs that we know a lot of people are wondering, especially with regards to the CLTD changes. So one of them is, which version of CLTD should I be using to run my classes between now and March? And really, we do want, starting now, if possible, to run with the new materials. And the reason for that is that most students, by the time they're finished and they're done with their review, it'll be time for them to sit for the new exam. But while there have been updates, just to also remember that students who are preparing with the old materials will still be able to sit for the new exam, or if they're ready to go early, they can sit for the existing exam without much issue there in terms of understanding that core content. And so if you do have students with current materials, just make sure you're encouraging them to sit before the 14th. They're probably going to be ready by now, and it gives them a really good goal. And I think we all know that the clearer the goal, the more likely it is that someone is going to be successful in working towards that. But of course, like we mentioned with the digital upgrade, if they're not able to sit, we can also help them to get those new materials as well. And for your part, how to get the new materials, like Michelle just said, they're up on the partner store ready to go. So go ahead and use that to get the 2020 updates. So with that, I think we'll hand that over to Bob.
Great. Thanks, Megan, and thanks, Michelle. We got some good questions. I've answered a couple of the easy ones, like are there price changes for 2020? And no, there are not. But we have some other questions I wanted to pass along to you. The first is, do the pre and post tests use the same questions but in different numerical order?
That's a great question. So for all of our quizzes in the materials, none of them are reusing questions. So each test bank is unique for each test. There are a very small number of quizzes, I think it's 2, in CLTD that have a huge number of items still, so those are pulling from the bank, but they're still only pulling from that one bank. So, and those say in the instructions area which ones they are. So all of the quiz instructions, when you first go into them, will say at the very beginning, this has X number of items, or all of these items are from X test bank. So it kind of does explain that in each one.
Okay, another similar question. The old pre and post tests relied heavily on memorization questions. Do the 2020 pre-post tests rely more on application and evaluation levels of learning?
Well, for CFCP, we, like I said, pulled in new items, different items that were pulled from the quiz questions. So those were looked at with a calculation formula based on whether or not it was indicative of knowledge and whether or not it was a challenging enough question. So if it was a question that was too easy, that did not get pulled in. In fact, if a question was too easy, we removed it entirely. And same thing if it was too difficult. For the other programs, aside from CLTD, which had a full revamp of all of the items, CPIM had the same items that were in there as previous. So the pretest for CPIM 1 and 2 was not touched. So it might be, especially for CPIM Part 1, those do have a different level of examination than those in Part 2, but those were still pulled from the legacy pretest items. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but that's what we did with those, with that analysis.
Is it safe to say, Megan, from a really high level, that the quizzes and the pretest tend to be more knowledge-based, but the post-test or final exam tend to be more application-based?
Yes, what we do try to do is get a good litmus test at the beginning with the pretest. So when we're picking those pretest items, we're trying not to pick anything where it's going to give them a false level of confidence one way or the other. So we try to pick items for the very beginning when they're getting their initial assessment, to that will actually guide them in the right direction. So at that level. When it comes to the practice, at the end, we are trying to get them to show those challenging levels that they are ready to sit for the exam. So yes, I think at a high level, that's kind of the case. And then for the section and chapter quizzes, there is definitely a mix in there. And that's, because they could be getting a mix of items as they're going through the materials. They need to know their key terms.
Yes, they do. Are the instructors able to review participants' quiz answers in the same way that each participant can review their quizzes?
I think what that's getting at is, can they see like which question was question one for the student and which question was question two? We don't go to that level in the Learning Analytics Center. We just go to the percent, and then you can see the number of attempts they've had and when they've had those attempts. So if there's a particular question that a student has on an item, it still makes sense for them to grab that question and show that to you to discuss it. But we do in the back end have analysis on our side to look at individual question items for performance. But we look at that at an aggregate level, not at a session-based level, because there's just not enough data there to show a real change. That is something that we are looking at, and we actually, if anyone has any requests, questions, ideas about reporting that they would like to see, I actually strongly encourage that you send that across, because that's an area that we're investigating for next year, updating, and we're continuing to pull in different ideas from instructors across all different areas, including you all for the certifications for ASCM. And I know that some instructors have already been sending those our way over the years, but we are looking to collect that. So any ideas like that are strongly encouraged to send those over.
Great. Another question, how will the new CPIM material affect students currently in CPIM 1 looking to take CPIM 2 preparation?
Well, there aren't any exam changes for CPIM, so I would say that in this case it is a minor update for CPIM from 19 to 20, so there really shouldn't be that much different for them. I think maybe I'm reading into this question a little bit, but when we had the update after the first major launch, we did do some moves around of content, much more than we probably typically do in a minor update. We didn't do that level of change this year for CPIM.
Great. Another question, can you explain where we can get the pricing info on all the 2020 learning systems? I'm going to start by saying that our global channel services should be providing a sheet showing all the various levels of pricing. However, Megan, Michelle, I'm sure they can get information from the partner store.
Yeah, definitely. If you log into the partner store, you would see your appropriate pricing level. We have it set up on the back end, where we know if you are a channel level or a premier level, and then it's set up accordingly. But yes, you're right, Bob, that ASCM Global Channel Services would be sending out any pricing sheets. We don't present those, but like I said, go to the online store, log in there, or if you don't actually order yourself, but your office administrator or coordinator or whatever you call them, they can do that for you and let you know what the pricing is.
Great, and I will emphasize again, there are no price changes from 2019 to 2020. Of course, if you don't know what the 2019 prices are, then that doesn't help you. Another question, I read somewhere earlier that the free upgrade for CLTD 2020 must be requested by December 31st, 2019. Is this still the case?
No, I think from our understanding, the upgrades would be happening actually after the exam changes, because until then, we're hoping people will be sitting for their current exam. So that would be through November 2020, not 2019 for CLTD.
Great. For those partners that have multiple instructors using the same material, can there be multiple names assigned to the kit? Let me start with one answer, and then Michelle, I think you can finish this one off. My answer first is that if you look at the instructor agreement, chapters may allow various instructors to use the same instructor kit, except in the instance where both instructors are teaching the same material at the same time. In that case, you need two kits, but that's pretty rare, if ever. So, Michelle, I'll let you handle the setting the people up in the
logistics. Yeah, so if you have a situation like that, This is where Lauren will come in. So after instructor kit orders are placed, she is following up with whomever placed those orders for instructor kits. And so part of that would be if you have, say, 2 instructors at the same partner, but you don't necessarily need 2 CLTD instructor kits because you're teaching at different times, we absolutely can add an additional license to the account and assign that to whoever the instructor is. So it's a matter of handling it on a one-off basis based on your situation, because every partner is different. Every partner has a different situation. So just make sure that you're communicating with Lauren. And like I said, she will be reaching out to the organization, expecting a reply back with what the situation is and who needs those instructor kit licenses assigned.
Great. Quick question, does the new calculator handle square root calculations? The new
Well, let me get back for you. I don't believe it is a scientific calculator off the top of my head. I have not been personally using it recently, so I can't recall. I think it is a simple calculator, but I can double check, and we can answer that in the Q&A. I would just pull it up and look right now, but I don't want to mess up the PowerPoint deck here that we've got on the screen. But I believe it's a simplified calculator.
All right. Next question, will the exercises be integrated back into the CPIM PowerPoint presentations? You did address that. Why don't you repeat how that works?
Yes, so if they were moved into the instructor slides, they would be in the core slides. If they were removed, they're removed, and there are a select number that were, I think mostly in part 1, that were moved into online quizzes.
So a variety, they're handled in a variety of ways. There's the calculator on the screen right now. It looks like pretty straightforward, simple calculator. A couple of questions in relation to that. How do we differentiate between the study guides with the instructor slide included and the study guides without the instructor slide? So someone had asked earlier if everybody was going to see the slides, and my response was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my response was that self-study learning systems would not include the slides. Learning systems that were purchased for instructor-led classes would include the slides. But how are you differentiating between the two? And I guess I'm going to add a question to that. Suppose an individual orders a study, a learning system, and then decides a month later that they really need to take a class.
If that situation comes up, and this does happen, it's kind of frequent actually. Typically what will happen is the partner or instructor will let us know, hey, I have a student who has the self-study materials, they want to take our class, how can we help them? And so typically what we want to do first is validate that they're a legitimate purchaser of the material. So we get their name and their email, and we'll search them in our system and hopefully find them in the system as a self-studier. And what we can do is move them over or link them up to the partner account and give them an instructor-led license. So if they've already activated their self-study account and they've done some quizzes, that sort of is just kind of done. They can start fresh, which they should anyway. If they're taking a class, they should start fresh with a new pre-test and the quizzes and whatnot. So that would be the best way to handle that if you do come across somebody who wants to take your class who has previously purchased a self-study learning system.
Great. And internally, how do you know whether someone is taking a class or self-study? So
if they give us their name and their email, we can search for them in our a database. We can search and see if they're a self-study student. We can see in our CRM when that purchase would have come in. There's a number of ways that we can check to see if they exist and that they in fact do have a legitimate learning system license assigned to them. That's how we would validate that. And if it comes back, we can't find them anywhere, we have no record of this person, perhaps they can dig a little deeper and let us know. But we will do the due diligence to make sure that they have the history in our system first, prior to initiating a new instructor-led license.
When a partner or an instructor orders learning systems, at the point of order, do they have to indicate whether this is for a class or whether they're purchasing some self-study units for people in their area?
No, so the online store is set up to automatically generate instructor-led licenses, which will then go into the partner inventory, at which point then the office administrator or the instructor, if they're doing dual roles, can set up course sessions. And if you have students that are self-study, what I would recommend doing is setting up a course session for, say, CLTD 2020 self-study, call it self-study, and put all of your self-studiers in that one session throughout the year. I have noticed when I can see all the different partner accounts that some partners will add a course session for every single self-studier. You don't have to do that. What I would do is create one session, call it self-study for the year, and put all of your self-studiers in there. Then you know that they're in there. They're all in one place. You don't have to go through and have a list of 30 self-study sessions. Now, if you have instructor-led classes, then of course create your course sessions for instructor-led. But the license that's generated is in fact an instructor-led license. And one of the, I would say, a best practice for those people who are in a self-study session is you have the ability to create a course announcement. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, there are video tutorials in every instructor resources folder and also in the Getting Started folder, where I've created screen grabs or screenshots of walking through how to do various things. One of those things, which I think is very critical, is to create a course announcement. And if it's a self-study group, you could welcome those individuals and tell them, this is a self-study course, an instructor is not monitoring this account or something to that effect. However you want to set it up. But that way, when those students log in, they see an announcement from that partner. And you can use that throughout the course. So maybe you want to set up some tutoring sessions. You could do that through the announcements feature. But I say that to everybody across the board, whether you're doing instructor-led courses or self-study, using that announcements feature, which is in the Learning Analytics Center, which is where instructors are already going if they are looking at those quiz results and the pre-test and post-test and all the different session enrollment reports. You're already there. If you look above, you'll see 3 tools, and that's the facilitator tools, and one of those is the announcements feature. And I highly recommend people to utilize those tools, because if you don't put a message or an announcement into that area, when your students log in, they're in the learning system, but the screen is sort of blank and says no announcement. So why not at least the very bare minimum, welcome your students to the learning system, thank them for taking your class or purchasing from you or whatever. It's a great way to stay connected to your students.
And they don't have to be long.
No, they can be short and sweet. If you look at my video in the video tutorial section, it's called How to Create a Course Announcement. There's an example in there, and you could freeze the camera or freeze the screen, and you can use that. I might even have a few that I could share with you too if you needed some help with those announcements.
So when we're talking about the slides being embedded for the instructor-led class learning systems, are we discontinuing the hard copy slide books? Will partners still be able to buy the hard copy slide books as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so they would be able to have, if you wanted to, have the hard copy printed, booklets, absolutely, with the lines for note taking and all of that, just like we've always had. It's just now there's an additional resource within the learning system.
Great. Someone asked about the adding the progress checks to the online tools. They want to know if this is in addition to the online section quizzes.
They are added within them. So they've been added as additional items in those quizzes.
Michelle, someone asked, as a freelance instructor, how can I access the partner store?
You have to work through a partner. The partner store is just that, where it is set up for partners that have an account through ASCM. So I would recommend, tapping into your local partner to see if that's the best way for you to work with them on getting materials.
Someone asked whether were the submissions from the instructors the submissions from the instructors reviewed and updated in the new CPIM?
Yes. So the subject matter expert teams for the courseware look at all of those comments that are sent through, and they are reviewed and evaluated, and then decisions are made based on each of those individual comments. Because we do the update process throughout the year, obviously, when it came to like August, for example, we were already starting to print the materials and things like that. So some comments may have come through in the last couple of months that won't have been able to be incorporated just from a timeline perspective because we print the reading materials. But anything that we were able to get in before that time, we did evaluate. They were all evaluated before we went into the process, and then any comments that have come through since that kind of freeze point, we are still looking at and will incorporate into future updates.
One of the instructors asked, could the quick comments submitted and feedback be acknowledged in the future?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'd like to know a little more about what that means in terms of, do we want to list people's names, or Bob, I'm not sure if you have a different interpretation of the question.
No, just that. But we know who asked the question. We can reach out to him after the webinar. This one's kind of mine. We've struggled to get enough people to hold CPIM classes due to costs. Is there a plan for a cheaper review type option, or does that already exist? No, I'm sorry, nothing exists directly from ASCM or APICS. We've looked very closely at pricing, trying to find that right mix between keeping the program valuable and not overcharging. But I do understand that is a problem for some folks. Really, the only thing I can suggest is talk to people about the value of having one of these certifications. When you go to the last salary survey that we did, it was almost embarrassing. The people that had an APICS certification earned about 27% more than people who had similar backgrounds, similar jobs, but had not earned the certification. So like any education, it can be very valuable to you if used right. So I don't have another answer to that. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if you'd like. How extensive are the changes on CSCP from 2019 to 2020?
So most of the changes for CSCP this year were the updates for the dictionary and all of those online question changes. So moving those items to the pretest and supplementing those additional 300 items that were added into the online were the major changes. And then the rest of the changes were all items that came through quick comments, the instructor survey, or other suggestions. So most of those changes were actually in the online for CSCP this year.
Great. Are the new case studies about the same length from module to module in CLTD? How many questions are included?
So each one has roughly between 4 to 5 questions per case study. The scenario length and the description might vary between each one. Some of them need a little bit more kind of background information than others, and some have graphics and some don't, like the value stream mapping, for example. But yeah, it's around the same length that you would see in the CSCP case studies.
Okay. Will the exercises be placed properly in the slide deck? I'm assuming that means where you would typically use them.
So the placement of the activities were reviewed by the subject matter expert team before finalized, and some of them were threaded in, and some of them were placed at the end of the section. So I know, for example, there's one on project management that didn't make as much sense to separate, so that was still kept together. That's just one example I can remember off the top of my head, but that was considered in terms of where they were placed.
I'm going to go ahead and answer the next question. Why would a course be set up for self-study? Because they're about half of the learning systems that we sell are for people who, for one reason or another, good reason, bad reason, are unable to take or unwilling to take an instructor-led course. And so therefore we have to be prepared for everybody to help them be as successful as we can. How large are the slides embedded within the content? Are they larger than the one-by-one thumbnails? Well, I think that they're looking at, they're thinking about the old legacy courseware, how we used to have the thumbnail slides in the instructor guides. But maybe there's another, maybe they're thinking of something else. So I'm going to pass this on to you, Megan.
So the slides are in a few different places. Obviously, the instructor resource book still has 1 page per slide. So that includes almost a half-page size slide at the top and then the notes at the bottom. The student slide books have 2 slides per page with lines underneath. And then these embedded slides, it's a full slide page. So I don't know if you can tell from the top here, but that's what the menu text is, if you can recall how big our menu text is. And then that is the size of the slide on the screen. It's a digital format, which means when you click on it to open it, it'll open full page in your browser if you want. If you download it, that slide is a full PDF page. You can make it as big as your monitor if you wanted to.
That's helpful for me. I've got a supersized monitor too. So someone is asking if we can start providing a tracking document on suggestions that have been submitted and the response. So I think that would refer to the quick comments.
Right, and I know, Bob, you and I have discussed this before about, I don't know, some of the comments that we get in, I don't know if the individual would want that comment to be made public. Our SMEs look at every single comment exactly as it is written. They come through in a weekly, monthly spreadsheet, and then each item is added in for review. Each one has feedback based on subject matter experts. Some of them have back and forth, some of them don't. I mean, that's the process that we have. I don't necessarily know if some of the comments that do come in that some of these instructors would want them to be made public in a tracking document.
That's something that we'll continue to monitor and discuss. Someone had a question about the tiered pricing for the various partners. The only thing I can say about that is that those decisions are primarily made by the channel group, with the goal of incenting partners to continue to buy and sell more. But if you'd like more information about the tiered pricing, you'll need to go back to the global channel organization. So I've got time for a couple more questions. So I'm not sure when will APICS Dictionary be available with the learning system material, a single order for all the materials. I've not been able to sell the CLTD class locally. I'm sorry, I hadn't read this beforehand. I just want to make sure. So how do we address the APICS dictionary in the learning systems?
So the dictionary is provided in the online glossary. Every term that is used in all of the materials, the flashcards, the reading materials, the questions are all 16th edition. If you want a printed copy, obviously that's separate, that you would get from ASCM. I believe, Bob, that they get it as a member, if I'm not mistaken. But all of those terms, the 16th edition is what's incorporated in all the 2020 material.
Right. So the APICS dictionary is available for free as a download to all APICS ASCM members. I believe there may be a cost for printed copies at this point. The other thing that I strongly recommend folks consider is the APICS dictionary app. It includes almost all of the definitions and is very, very handy. And that's free for everybody, whether you're a member or not. So there are a couple of ways that you can access and provide that. In regard to the optional exercises, this person acknowledges they've either been added online in the slide or the deck or removed. Does this mean there will no longer be problems to print out separately?
Correct. So before, they were optional activities where an instructor could choose if they wanted to do that at the end of class, at the beginning of a class, in the middle, and treat it as a separate activity. Now that they have been moved into the core deck, they are just treated as a core deck piece of content.
We have an IP question, and I'll wrap up with this one, I think. How will you control students from downloading the instructor slides and sharing them with others? So I'll start with that one. You can't prevent people from doing bad things, but there are agreements that people sign before accessing the courseware, and frankly, although some of the slides would be useful, many of them may not be all that useful without an instructor explanation anyway. So we're not sure how much use they would be if someone did try to share them. That's my thought, but Megan, I'll let you expand on that or correct that.
Well, and I guess the only thing I'll add there is essentially they're not downloading a PowerPoint file. They are only downloading these slides as a PDF, so they can't use it as a actual presentation. But yes, as you were saying, Bob, they are under a license agreement, and if we find anyone sharing that on the internet, just like we do now, people can take a book and make a photocopy. So you can't necessarily stop that from happening, especially without ensuring that all of the people who are being honest about how they're using the materials. I mean, otherwise we're restricting students from being able to use anything, So anything that we provide to a student so that they can have offline access is something that has a risk there, but that is why we have license agreements and have the ability to take those licenses away.
Absolutely. We hope we don't have to do that, but we do pursue those type of situations. You know what? We're really out of time. I think there are a couple extra questions which we will address after the webinar and in the Q&A document, but we're really running out of time. As I said, we'll consolidate all the questions received today and answer them in a Q&A document that we've posted with this webinar when it's posted in a couple of weeks. You all will receive an email with the link, and feel free to share this link with other IDP instructors, your APICS partners, and chapter leaders. So at this point, if you'll pull up the last slide with the speaking of intellectual property, It has our statement there. We want to thank everyone for attending today and for sending us your questions and comments. We hope you have a great day and hope that you'll all attend the next webinars and workshops in the new 2020 series coming up next year. All content and materials included in this online event are the property of APICS and are protected by the United States and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.